Gentlemen, lady, as we leave, let me read you something here.
Okay.
This is from Haruki Murakami in the 2009 Jerusalem Prize for Literature award-winning speech, who said, "Between a high solid wall and an egg that breaks against it, I will always stand on the side of the egg. Yes, no matter how right the wall may be and how wrong the egg, I will stand with the egg. Someone else will have to decide what is right and what is wrong. Perhaps time or history will decide. If there were a novelist who, for whatever reason, wrote works standing with the wall, of what value would such works be?" What do you think of the morality of this statement?
The morality of the statement is off. I mean, the Talmud teaches us that the judge is to favor neither the rich nor the poor.
Right.
And it's very tempting, but the poor and the egg cannot always be right. What I also think of listening to this one is another writer of Chinese extraction, although American and living in the States, Maxine Hong Kingston in The Woman Warrior. The mother explains that the aunt is crazy, and how does she know? Sane people tell many stories. Crazy people only have one story. You need more than one story.
I see. That's going to be a tough sell, though, now.
Well, you get less guilt out of that sort of thing, too.
It is. It's nicely written, but I do think it's really dangerous because it's the wrong level of resolution. And part of what has happened to us as we've adopted a more victim culture is we've accepted the idea that if you're oppressed, you must be morally superior. And that's not right, and it clouds our policies like mad. I mean, poverty is a good example. I mean, some people are poor because they've really got a rough break. And some people are poor because they don't do anything. And you can't even say that, you know, or maybe one side takes one story and one side takes the other.
No, I just want to add to something that Jordan says. He's quite right, you know, but there's very little evidence that ethnic groups that were once oppressed and that gained their freedom are any nicer than their others, or including their former oppressors.
And the evidence is probably reversed, actually.
Because they've learned.
But we are seeing experiments that are still, for example, with the Truth and Reconciliation process in South Africa. So we've seen innovations to try to deal with institutional change that doesn't allow that cyclical reversion where power becomes the abuser of the vulnerable. Because the point that I think you raised at the end of our conversation around how we need institutions, but we need accountable institutions, pliable institutions, transparent institutions. They need to be
appropriately sized institutions.
appropriately sized
But it doesn't
institutions.
look like we're headed. I mean, there's been an inexorable 40-year trend
Well, that's one of
towards.
the consequences of globalization and interconnectedness. I mean, we're increasingly entering an age where winner takes all. And not just in finance, that's happening everywhere. It's happening with novelists, it's happening with artists, because when everyone's communicating, there's only one dominance hierarchy. And the person at the top takes everything.
And
They're quite right.
And while the institutions are obviously the most important part of this, there is also a question of the media's role and attitudes, that the narrative is too simple, that everyone now is doing what this novelist is doing, that history is the lies of the victor, but history is also the delusions of the defeated. It's not just that you're not morally superior for having been oppressed, it doesn't mean that your version of the story is right, with all respect to Quebec.
You won. You won. I think Jordan makes a very interesting point because oh shit, I forgot what I was going to say.
Well, you know what? Let me put this, because you, having written 2 books about Sir Johnny MacDonald, I always want to know, what would Sir John A. have thought of this discussion today? Where would he be on
He would
this?
say it's impractical. It achieves nothing. It's just a bunch of intellectuals exchanging ideas. He was practical. No, he wouldn't know. He didn't waste time on thought for its own sake. Only a couple of times he did. One, which you would be or at least interested, when he advocated votes for women. And was the first leader in the world.
Where this is incredibly practical, I think, is that we don't have stories to allow moral reflection on issues that befuddle us. So, we're using David and Goliath. We're in some ways focusing on David and Goliath, whereas actually the real story is David and Samuel, of which Goliath happened to be the outside accelerator of this change in kingship. But having the resources to use these narratives to break apart some of the issues, because otherwise we're just locked in personalized justification for why.
Well, that's actually what the media is supposed to do, because the public will put a simplified narrative on any set of facts, and it'll revert to an archetypal narrative, which is sort of low resolution. And the purpose of the media, Well, is to do, I think, what you were probably doing with your interview earlier today, is to take the generic narrative and say, wait a minute, you know, the real story here is at the level of the details, and that's where you find truth. Truth is at the level of the detail.
But also, let me just say, you're saying the
Last word
public
here.
does this, that they default to this. I would say, even though this makes my profession sound like David facing Goliath, that the huge publicity machines, the spin doctors, are busy manipulating those stories and simplifying for the public. The public isn't doing this entirely for themselves. They're getting a lot of help.
Last
I
word.
just want to go
last
back
word
to
for our
what
senior
I
correspondent.
remember now what I wanted to say about what Jordan had said, that we are a winner-take-all society, which is increased. Of course, it's absolutely correct. If you've got money, you're going to make more money automatically, and you're going to hand it on to your children and all the rest of it. That is to say, we're becoming a Goliath-oriented society at the very time when the mass of people have never been more David or victim-oriented.
And we're all pretending
There's
to
a
be
complete
Goliath.
contradiction.
That's right, David.
Thanks for this, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you very much.
Support Ontario's public television. Donate at tvo.org.